How's it going, creeps? Welcome to episode 6 of Cinema Creep, a Black Mass Films podcast where we dissect all things vile, disgusting, and downright terrifying in the world of horror cinema. We got a quick shout out for our sponsor, Everblack Coffee. Go to everblackcoffee.com, grab a bag for yourself. It is awesome, high quality, ethically sourced coffee with a macabre twist, and it's what we drink here on the show. So we have kind of had, a little bit of difficulty staying on track here the last couple weeks. It's been crazy, but we're getting things back in order. So I am Justin James, and today I am joined by the rad dad himself, Andrew Henderson.
What's up?
So, last couple weeks, man, been a hell of a ride. Lots of crazy stuff going on. So do you want to dive into some news that is also pretty crazy, or do you want to talk about what you've watched, which is a little bit of a lighter subject at first?
I say let's get the weird shit out of the way. If you want to go ahead and talk about what news you have for us tonight.
All right. So I don't want to touch on this too much because this has already been it's all over Twitter and stuff, but so if any of you have been following this this news that is broken, so Fangoria and Birth Movies and Death are both looking for new ownership because the Dallas-based film studio Cinestate that owns both Fangoria and Birth Movies and Death, so they've been quite in the spotlight of controversy. So one of their film producers, Adam Donahue, so there were allegations that he sexually assaulted and raped a 16-year-old girl on the set of the 2017 film A Ghost Story. So, according to multiple reports, she wrote on Facebook last year that he had raped and molested her during production of the film. So he was arrested on April 27th, but he posted $25,000 bail the next day. So, yeah, that's pretty steep, but I mean, it honestly probably should have been more.
No, it definitely should. He shouldn't have been out on bail. The thing is, goddamn, that's he just has $25,000 to spend on that.
Right. Well, I mean, Cinestate's a pretty big,
right
thing, but now, I mean, not now. They're screwed now because the whole problem with this is, they kept him employed. So that's where the controversy is coming in. It's not just that Cinestate's reputation is being tarnished because of him. It's because they, knowingly kept him on. So Fangoria editor-in-chief Phil Noble Jr. tweeted that they have come to understand and respect that Fangoria and Birth Movies and Death cannot continue under the Cinestate banner. It is our understanding that new buyers are being sought out for both brands. So this is affecting a lot of people. I saw this is also affecting fellow podcasters, such as Shockwaves, right? Because it's a Blumhouse production, but they also went in partnership with Fangoria. So,
yeah, for sure.
One of their hosts has actually stepped down because there were also allegations towards him. So crazy stuff going on in the world of horror, but it is nice to see these companies stepping up and saying, hey, this isn't okay, so we're not going to continue working under this banner. I just hope, someone does pick Fangoria up for sure, and, Birth Movies and Death. So,
wait, somebody at Shockwaves had allegations against them as well?
Yeah, one of the co-hosts has actually stepped down.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, I haven't looked too much into that. I'll pull up their Twitter real quick because that's where I saw that from. So if you go to Shockwave's Twitter, the pinned tweet at the top says, the Blumhouse Shockwaves podcast is moving off the Fangoria podcast network and will once again operate independently. More episodes coming your way soon. And then on June 9th, they tweeted, Rob Galuzzo is no longer working as a co-host on the Shockwaves podcast. For now, the podcast is on hiatus, but we'll keep you posted on when we will be back with new episodes. And then, of course, if you just keep scrolling down, you'll find Fangoria's statement on the Cinestate deal. And you'll find, articles talking about the Rob Galuzzo thing. But I don't know enough about it to give a take on it. I don't want to miscommunicate. I don't want to drag the dude's name, but then I also, if he did do anything, I also don't want to minimize or invalidate any accusation. So I'm just going to kind of let that one unfold before I give any more. So, but Cinestate, Fangoria is leaving. They're looking for new ownership, and Shockwaves is no longer associated with Fangoria. So that is pretty much it for the news.
Heavy.
Yeah, some pretty heavy shit. So, what have you watched? I know we both watched the same one thing, but you watch anything unique this week?
Yeah,
or the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I've watched a ton of stuff. Interesting. I'll get into the thing that I watched that we both didn't view this past week. So Shudder's original documentary Horror Noir is basically it's a look at the history of black horror films and the role of African Americans in the film genre from the very beginning. So this, this documentary's been out for, I think it's been out for like a year or better. It's, I think it was 2019. But, with the current events going on in the world and, anytime, I think we really need to do a better job at appreciating influences in certain parts of music and certain parts of
like pop culture
cinema,
in general.
Right? Pop culture in general, right? Because I never really paid much attention to how much like people of color or black people, how big of an impact they actually had on the horror industry. And of course, but I haven't really, from the inception, from the early days on, this documentary talks about how influential black people were to the horror genre, and it also talked about some of the negative things that came from cinema in the early days, like the movie Birth of a Nation, and how essentially racism coalesced in these movies, and what it did was it essentially created all these stereotypical things about black people, not that only didn't just exist within cinema, but it existed in society and everyday life just from movies early on. So it opened my eyes up to a lot of things. And I don't know, man. I think it was just a good watch. And like I said, if you haven't watched it before now, just given the current events that are unfolding, I think it is a must watch. And I think as a horror fan, you have the responsibility to watch it. And, as well,
it's definitely on my list for this weekend, especially because I was going to watch that and, of course, the documentary that we did both watch, because I feel like those are both important. But definitely the horror noir right now is at the forefront, given, the current events and a lot of the issues with racism in our country. Well, in the world, really. But so I'm definitely going to check that out.
Right. I mean, it was directed by a guy named Xavier Bergen. And I mean, he's done a few things as a director, right? I think he has somewhere around like 20 credits or something like that to his name. But he's a black man, so he's a writer, director, cinematographer, and I mean, the dude is, I want to say, fairly unknown, I guess, when it comes to the horror world, because not everything on his resume is horror, but seems super like he's gonna have a promising career, just not as a documentarian, but just as a narrative filmmaker as well, because a lot of his other stuff is narrative. And yeah, so speaking of current events, Justin, unfolding around the world, the next thing we both watched is perfect timing too, because it is
Pride Month.
Yep. So you went.
Yeah, so if you guys haven't seen, if you are Shudder subscribers, which again, every episode we highly advocate for, the documentary Scream Queen: My Nightmare on Elm Street. This follows Mark Patton, who was in the Notorious, which we'll talk a little about that in a minute, because Andrew and I both didn't realize how notorious it was until like recent years. But the Notorious Nightmare on Elm Street 2. So, you know, this goes into how there was a lot of homoerotic subtext in the film, and how this ruined his career because, I mean, this is like the 80s, this is the mid 80s, so you had the AIDS scare, and then you had a director who, or not a director, you had a screenplay writer who was at the time trying to deny any subtext, and he was trying to say that it was supposed to come off as homophobic, but instead Mark Patton was just so gay that he ruined the film. And then, you know, this ended up ruining his career, and he went into hiding. Actually he was in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he moved to Mexico, and no one had ever, like, they hadn't heard from him in like 20 something years. And then they started making this other documentary, Never Sleep Again, and you know, they tracked him down. They basically had to hire like private investigators to find him. But it's a crazy look into how the 80s handled, you know, the AIDS pandemic, and the just the idea of same-sex couples and stuff. And like the whole middle section of the documentary, you start to think, well, why are they going so deep into this, you know? Like, but it all makes sense. Like the first maybe 20 minutes is talking about Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and then it goes into talking about the AIDS epidemic, because there was, you know, like in Hollywood, there were pretty much witch hunts. If you were a homosexual actor, or, you know, they suspected that you had AIDS, like you were blacklisted. And, you know, I think he talked about, didn't he say something like when you would go to auditions, they would give you a blood test, basically?
Right, to make sure you didn't have HIV.
Yeah, so, I mean, it was pretty crazy times, and it was really sad. Like, I kind of feel bad for the dude, but I think, you know, the way it ended, the way it was wrapped up with him sitting down and speaking to the writer of the film and actually getting some kind of closure on the issue. I thought that was pretty nice.
I mean, it was nice, you know, because David Chaskin, he had in the past, he's made some like some homophobic remarks in publications, right? It wasn't just like in passing, like it's actually written and out there if you want to find it in interviews for the film. And
right,
you know,
but it was also, I just want to interject real quick, it wasn't even necessarily like he truly thought these things, but it was even more cowardly. Instead of him like genuinely thinking these things and just quote speaking his mind, it was the film was getting so much backlash that to save his own skin, he was making homophobic remarks. But then as soon as like this film in the last decade or so has become like a cult thing, and like now is, you know, loved and is being discussed in film classes and social classes and stuff, now he's like, you know, he's saying that, oh, it was all intentional, and now he's trying to like soak it up. So it's like he's just trying to save his own skin and then get the attention for it, which I think is even worse than just straight up being like, you know. Right.
No, I mean, I definitely agree with you. I mean, honestly, from my point of view, he seems like a sleazeball. I'm just gonna say, like, whether or not he was able to reconcile with Mark Patton or not, you know, right, and say, hey, I did the wrong thing. I think it's sort of like one of those things. It's like, can a leopard change its spots sort of deal? I mean, everybody can change, everybody can get a different mindset, but it's also like, you know, I don't know, man. I feel you. He does look, he even just looks like that kind of dude. Like, not to, I mean, you know, that might be kind of hypocritical of what we're talking about for me to be like, oh, he just looks sleazy. But I mean, he looks like, so you've got a kid, right? So you've seen the Toy Story with the dude that's trying to like collect and sell the toys, right? Right. That's what this dude looks like. Like, he is the real life embodiment of the dude from Toy Story. Well, I mean, more or less, you can tell a lot by somebody's body language. And to me, he just didn't seem authentic in his apology. He seemed like he was wanting to participate in the documentary. And, I mean, he just, I don't know. His
Right.
apology just didn't seem genuine. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Well,
But,
I think the reason it seems so ingenuine is because, now he was like when Mark Patton was talking to him at the end, whenever he was like really expressing himself, he was letting Mark Patton talk. He was just listening, wasn't interrupting. But the reason I feel like that might seem ingenuine is because I feel the same thing, is because, we've seen him now change his stance twice. When the film was getting, torn to pieces because of the quote subtext, he was saying, oh, no, it wasn't written that way, but Mark ruined it and made it gay. And now that it's like, oh, this movie is a staple for the gay community and stuff, now he's trying to like act like he was woke in 1985 and he meant to do that. So it's like we've seen him like just try to make himself look good twice. So he very well could have just sat there and tried to look like he was a genuine dude, just so now people will be like, oh, well, he's changed and, he's a good dude. So I don't know.
well, regardless, see, talking about the actual movie, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, I always thought was a super rad one. There's something about it that I've always liked. And, I've always watched it, like I've watched any of the other Nightmare on Elm Streets. They've always had a goofy side to them. So all of the stuff that was chalked up by other people as gay or as like homoerotic, I always just thought was like sort of comedic, like the way Mark Patton was dancing in this film, like bumping the drawer closed with his ass and all that kind of stuff, and putting the little I can't remember what it was. He had the little thing and he was putting it like in front of his crotch and stuff like that.
Oh, the little party popper thing?
Yeah, the party popper. I always thought that was just like, oh, this is like comedic, like a lot of these movies.
Well, it always came off to me very like, it was the 80s. It's very like risky business, Tom Cruise like running across the floor in like socks and a shirt, like that's how that came off to me. It was like just this cheesy little like 80s thing, and it's like
80s dance sequence.
80s dance sequence, yeah.
The only thing that ever stood out to me was when he's in the showers, and of course they're like was it like it's like whipping his ass, like Freddy Krueger's like
with
whipping
the towels,
his ass, with the towels.
But
and
then again, that's Freddy Krueger. Like he would so do that, like.
Right. But then he has where he screams. He looks and he has a glove on his hand and he screams. And I always thought his scream was just like super comical. I never thought it was feminine. I just thought, well, that's just bad acting. His scream is hilarious. And I never even knew, because I mean at the time nobody knew that he was a gay actor because he tried to keep it closeted, right? He was a closeted gay man at the time, right? Because of everything that was going on, like you said. But so nobody really knew at the time. But I don't know. I never thought of him as a gay character. I always just thought he was a fine actor, but certain scenes, like when he was screaming, I just thought, oh man, he fucking dropped the ball there.
Right.
With his
Well,
scream.
before that, I mean, he was also used to like secondary roles in commercials. But I mean, to me, it's like people are trying to say, they're trying to look back at it, but it's the same as like looking back at Judas Priest. Like Judas Priest in the 70s and 80s, at first, like no one knew that Rob Halford was gay. But now if you look in retrospect, it's like Hellbent for Leather, Ram It Down, I'm Your Turbo Lover, like all of these Judas Priest songs from the early 80s and stuff. You're like, oh, it makes sense.
Right.
But
yeah, I mean everything.
But it wasn't anything that ever ruined the movie for me. You're right. But it wasn't anything that ever ruined the movie for me. Like, I mean, I also as a kid, like, because some people were thinking like, oh, this is gay propaganda or whatever. But I mean, even when I was a kid, and I remember the first time I saw the Rocky Horror Picture Show, I just thought it was a fucking masterpiece. I didn't think anything of the homoerotic undertones or anything. Like, I was just like, that shit was fun.
Yeah, the same here. I was like, oh, that's fucking like, I don't know. I was like, that's the dude from Home Alone. That's rad. He's wearing high heels and lipstick and fishnets. Like,
He's a transvestite from Transylvania.
Yeah, well, that's what he says anyways. That's not your own words. Let's make that one clear. That's a derogatory term.
Okay,
there.
if someone's watching this and hasn't seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show, I mean, come on. Damn it, Janet.
But I think that this documentary is fantastic, not only to talk a little bit about Elm Street 2, but also to open your eyes on some of the stuff that not only that the gay community had to deal with in the 80s in terms of gay actors in particular, but also just in society, but also just Mark Patton in general, and just some of the slimy shit that happens in Hollywood, I think it was just an overall good documentary. I enjoyed it a lot, and I recommend it to anybody, anybody I talk to over the next little while. And I think stuff like this is important. I'm glad Shudder got behind it and put it on their platform.
Same. So that is Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. So before we move into today's main topic, pretty much I haven't really gotten to watch any films, but this is pretty fun. I've been going back and revisiting some of the Nickelodeon classics. Are You Afraid of the Dark? Do you remember that shit?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so that was pretty much like, as a kid, my gateway into horror, right? That and Goosebumps. But I feel like going back and watching some of these episodes, I feel like this was more horror than Goosebumps, because Goosebumps had it was super campy, but you could tell it was only campy because they were trying to make it like, this is a kid's show, we don't want it to be too horrific. But Are You Afraid of the Dark had some dark stuff. The only thing is, it's kind of funny going back and watching them, because some of the episodes are like direct kind of rip-offs of like actual horror films. Like one of the episodes I watched was The Tale of the Reanimator. Yeah, guess what that's based on.
Yeah.
But instead of like reanimating people, because in a kid's show, they're not going to have him like cut some dude's head off and reanimate him. The dude was like reanimating plants and stuff. But he was still, he had the same aesthetic and everything.
He was like a mad scientist type.
Yeah. So, and then revisit another episode. I remember it as a kid. What was it called? It was about this comic book character that the dude, like, I just remember he's reading the comic in class, and his teacher takes the comic book and throws it in like a fish tank. The Tale of the Ghastly Grinner, that's the one. So the kid like grabs the comic out of the fish tank, and he takes it home and he puts it in the microwave to dry it out. And when he does, like, the Ghastly Grinner is now escaped. Like, he goes back to the microwave and there's a hole in it on the whole thing, and like the Ghastly Grinner has escaped into the real world, and he's very like, I guess he's supposed to be like the Joker, but he's like in a yellow and blue jester costume, and he like makes everyone start like laughing hysterically and like oozing this blue slime out of their mouths and stuff. And it's just really weird stuff that as a kid I was like, this is great. I mean, of course it's like cheesy going back and watching it now as a 29-year-old, but
right. I mean, they were a lot of fun, as a kid. I mean, especially if you're in your late 20s to early 30s, it was a staple in your childhood, your preteens. And I remember a lot of the episodes, and like you said, a lot of them were taken from horror movies that came before them. Some were original stories, some were, stuff going on in society at the time, just spin-offs of that. I remember one episode, it's I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was about this kid that's playing a pinball machine in a mall. Do you remember that one?
I think so.
I can't remember. It's like either, let me see, The Tale of the Pinball Wizard. Here it is. And I remember liking that one a lot as a kid. It was the 13th episode in season 1. So, yeah. So essentially, he was playing pinball in the mall, and let me see. I can't remember whether he goes into the game or the wizard comes out of the pinball machine into the mall, but I remember that one being a lot of fun.
Right.
But
then there were also ones like Zebo the Clown, if that's the one that I remember. They were in like the fun house. I mean, some of the clown ones had it was very Killer Clowns from Outer Space aesthetic.
did you know that
So-
2019 last year they had Are You Afraid of the Dark? I guess a 3-part series come out.
I did not. So I'm going to have to check that out.
You might want to check it out. 3-part series, self-contained limited series about the newest members of the Midnight Society. Her first scary tale and what happens to the group when the terrifying events of the story start to actually happen in their small town.
Oh, I think I heard something about that. Yeah, they were like telling the stories because, if you guys are unfamiliar with the show, for those of you who are listening that might be a little younger, so the show was based around this group of kids, this group of teenagers or young adults or whatever, and they would all meet once a week in the middle of the woods at night around a campfire, and one of them would tell a super scary story, and sometimes, it was the person was telling the story to try to impress the group and actually be accepted in. But some of the stories were meh. Some of them were
Exceptional
creepy
pieces of horror.
Yeah. So definitely go back and revisit some of that. So we are going to take a quick sponsor break unless you've got anything else to add real quick, Andrew.
No.
All right. So we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to dive into some awesome summer camp horror films. How's it going, creeps? One quick mid-episode break to tell you a little more about our sponsor. Since 2016, Everblack Coffee Company has delivered exceptional single-origin coffee and high fives all over the world. They understand that a cup of coffee is so much more than something you drink. That's why they source their beans from farms that only use fair trade and organic growing practices. When you buy coffee from Everblack, you can be certain that you're getting the highest quality coffee available by ethical means only. It's time to start looking at coffee differently. Head over to everblackcoffee.com and grab a bag for yourself. It's deliciously dark. Now back to the show. Welcome back. So tonight's episode is we're gonna jump into, I guess you'd call it a subgenre, maybe of horror or slashers. So we are gonna talk about summer camp horror films. So this could have been a little more broad, talking about just horror films that happen on campgrounds in general, but we wanted to talk about just summer camp because there are quite a few good franchise or single films that happen on summer campgrounds. So we're not really just going to list off, what our favorites are or anything. We're just going to kind of talk about some of the tropes and stuff, and then dive into some of our favorite moments from maybe some of our favorite films. And these are just really, dare I say, campy films. You want to talk about some of these tropes?
Yeah, let's do that first. Also, I want to talk about the psychology a little bit. I want your opinion on it, right? So, why do you think that horror and summer camp movies work so well? Do you have any opinions on that?
I don't know if I'd say I really have an opinion. I just know, to me, it's always been,
or why do you
the
think
reason I've just always liked it. Well, I mean, you've got as far as like if your goal is to like scare kids, especially like in the 70s and 80s, summer camp was a big thing. It's not so much like that crazy anymore, but especially now, I mean, everybody's got cell phones and stuff. You give these kids in these movies cell phones, like you just ruin the whole plot unless you go with the cliche, like, oh, I have no cell signal. But
hey, that's real.
I don't know. I guess I just feel like for me,
I was like, damn.
Well, I mean, it happens. It does happen, but it's like you send all these teenagers to camp, and then it's like if these teenagers see these films, it's like now you're just kind of thinking like in the back of your head like, oh shit, is there like a masked maniac going to be coming around here? And then it also, you've got the typical sitting around the campfire telling stories. It's kind of the same thing, like when you're sitting in a campfire, whether it's summer camp or not, someone always tells a scary story, and they always try to base it on where they're at. Like it's some kind of urban legend. So I feel like that plays into also the psychology of making films about it, because then, teenagers when they're at summer camp are just going to be thinking about the fact that, well, this is exactly like that fucking movie. Like what if, some machete wielding dude busts up in here?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that it works so well because sort of what you said in a roundabout ways. If you think about it, a lot of times when you have these summer camp movies, you have obviously young adults or even, grade school children, right? So you have a sense of helplessness, right? So you don't have adults, big burly men that are going to be able to defend themselves against anything that happens at these summer camps. Your children or your young adults normally feel isolated or alone, so they're already vulnerable to anything that could happen to them. And also with that, you're in the middle of nowhere. Oftentimes these people are traveling to go to these summer camps, so even if they were to run away, they're not going to know where they're at, right? So I think there's all of these psychological things that make sense when you write a summer camp film or you write a camp film, right? That makes sense if you think about it more than just it being another cliche, right? Like it makes total sense to me. Like you said, even if it was playing on the we have no cell phone signal or whatever, trope.
Right. Well, it's not saying cliches are bad, because these kind of films, horror in general is like riddled with like cliches and tropes and stuff. So if you want to go into some of these tropes, for those of you who, have seen any summer camp horror film, that there are certain rules or guidelines that, certain boxes that have to be checked off, right? So one of the foremost things is you got your teenagers doing teenager things, right? Partying, having sex, doing drugs, drinking alcohol, sneaking away from counselors or the campgrounds to have sex, which then, sets them up being isolated. And then you get a nice little double kill sequence, or, one of them kills and gets away, and then the other runs back to camp to try to alert everybody, but then nobody believes them.
So that's what teenagers do? Promiscuous sex, drugs, and alcohol?
According to 80s horror films, yes, that's exactly what they do.
I did a lot of self-loathing and listening to music.
Look, same, but I'm just saying. According to the 80s, that's what teenagers did. Also according to the 80s, like, high school was way different than it really is too, but that's another episode.
Yeah.
So, because then there's also, you got your gratuitous nudity, as Andrew has written here in the notes, dicks out for nature. And then it's almost like some sort of revenge is being acted upon by the actual antagonist. And with that comes some creative ass kills, which we will dive into some of those as the episode goes, because there are some favorites in these films that we've got listed. So, Andrew, if you want to take us away into the wonderful land of Sleepaway Camp.
Oh, yeah. So, Sleepaway Camp, 1983, written and directed by Robert Hiltzik. And so, if you haven't seen Sleepaway Camp, then definitely watch it. It is probably has one of the greatest endings of any horror movie ever. The twist at the end is going to, first of all, make you feel uncomfortable. 2, you're not going to see it coming. And 3, it is going to stay with you for the rest of your life. So
yeah, forever.
So the synopsis here is Angela Baker is a shy, traumatized young girl. She is sent to summer camp with her cousin. Shortly after her arrival, anyone with sinister or less than honorable intentions gets their comeuppance. So
Yes.
basically, yeah. So this movie is weird through and through. A lot of the characters are weird. Um, so you don't really know exactly what to expect or what's going on, because all the characters, obviously people are dying and you're like, okay, well, who's actually the killer? And in our last podcast we talked about Giallo, and this has sort of Giallo elements to it. Did you get the vibes there in this too for Giallo elements, sort of like showing the killer's hands and never actually revealing the killer?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because it's, it's almost like it is got that whodunit kind of vibe, because throughout the whole film, you don't know who's killing.
Early slashers had that, right? They had that in common with Giallos.
Right.
So yeah, so this is a great movie, especially. What is the guy's name? The camp counselor. There's a scene that is so weird.
The old dude that's always smoking the cigar.
No, not the pedophile guy.
Or the dude with the short shorts.
The dude with the short shorts, yeah, where you can see like his whole fucking package when he's like got those red short shorts on. He wears like athletic stuff through the whole thing, and there's like one scene where they're like in the cafeteria, and he goes to get Angela, and he's like, "Come with me, Angela," and he's like, I'm like, holy shit, you can see like everything. Like his pants are so fucking tight. I'm like, how did anybody think that? First of all, like, this was a good wardrobe for this dude, and secondly, why would it ever be okay for a camp counselor to wear some shit like that?
Right.
I'm just
well, it was funny too. I mean, it was almost like it was I don't know how that came about. I don't know if the wardrobe manager was like, yeah, we're gonna do this for ironic reasons, or the actor was like, I'm just gonna wear these because I'm ripped and I can. But it was like, well, it was the 80s, so guys wore those short shorts all the time. But this dude's like kind of jacked, and he's like, it's like he was wearing like camp counselor shirts, but he had like the sleeves cut off of them.
He was wearing, essentially, it looked like he had body paint on his lower waist. Like, I mean, you could see 3D definition of everything this dude had going on. His name is Paul D'Angelo, played Ronnie in the movie. He what was he? Yeah, I think he was just like the camp counselor, but he ended up being sort of a good guy in the movie, so he wasn't ever like a creeper or anything like that. Sort of like what's that dude?
Well, I meant to tell you, I meant to put this in the notes, but you get to see him older too, and he wears the same kind of shit because he comes back in Return to Sleepaway Camp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to see Mel Dong and lots of it, Sleepaway Camp is the movie for you. It's a rad movie. It's a rad movie. It has enough kills and has enough of that Giallo-esque slasher horror elements to it to keep you entertained.
Right, but it also still follows the summer camp tropes. So basically, another trope that I didn't list here, but, well, I mean, kind of. If you're doing any of the partying stuff, the promiscuous sex, drugs, alcohol, you are guaranteed to die. I mean, that goes for like any slasher film, but so, Angela, she starts killing people. I mean, you don't know it's her, but anybody that's doing like questionable things is getting killed off. Now, later in the franchise, that becomes more prominent and more at the forefront of just everything. But there are some pretty brutal kills in this. You want to talk about your favorite, and then I'm going to go. So my favorite's pretty brutal from the first one.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me what yours is first.
Okay, so my favorite kill, and I don't even, it's not my favorite because it's like, I don't know. It's brutal. I guess that's why it's my favorite. But the kill with the curling iron.
Yeah, that's a good one. So you kind of figure that leaves some to the imagination.
Right. So don't want to give too much away because we want you guys to go watch these films. But all I'm going to say, there is a brutal death with a curling iron, you do see it, but you don't see it. Like you see it's very got the Hitchcock kind of shadow on the wall. So you know exactly what happens. And I feel bad for the girl. I do. But let's talk about yours.
Yeah, so my favorite is Artie's death, and that's when he gets the boiling pot of water in the kitchen, essentially poured on him, right? And I just think it's so grotesque, and it's one of those things that it's not like a stabbing death. It's not one of those kind of kills. It's something that you could imagine actually happening to somebody. So it makes it all the more gnarly in a way, you know. And then just the way they did it with the blisters and stuff was just kind of disgusting, and sold it. So supposedly I read a little bit about how they did the effect, just because, you know, out of pure interest. I've always liked this death scene. And he supposedly was propped up on a fake floor, and underneath they had liquid gelatin, and they pumped it through blisters, giving the impression that his blisters were pulsating. So I thought that was pretty sick. I don't know. That's just my favorite kill scene from the movie. I hated Artie anyways. So yeah, so it's kind of good to see him die, and then him to just have one of the coolest kill scenes in the movie is just like, okay, well, he died in a cool way, you know. He's a shitty person, so
right.
Yeah,
so that's the first Sleepaway Camp, so definitely check that out. Now, this film, its sequels get, you know, there's a little bit of controversy around them, just because, I mean, some people hate them. I love them, except for the last two, because so this film also has it's called Sleepaway Camp 4, The Survivor. So technically this film doesn't exist. It's put together with archival footage from the first and second films. I've never seen it. I've tried to find it, can't find it. Supposedly it was completed in 2012. They started making it in the 90s, and it just never got finished, and it's a lost film.
Good.
But
good.
Sleepaway Camp 2. Good. He said good. But Sleepaway Camp 2, Unhappy Campers. So this came out in 1988. The thing about this one is it is not Felissa Rose, who played Angela in the first film. Pamela Springsteen is playing Angela. So, I mean, it's obviously, you know, a different character. Or it's the same character, different actress.
A much better movie.
It is a much better movie from a technical standpoint. I mean, personally, I do enjoy it more. Sleepaway Camp 3, Sue Me, is probably my favorite from the first three. I don't know. I think the reason why is because Sleepaway Camp 3 is the first one that I ever saw. I was a kid.
That's weird.
And it came on. Yeah, well, it came on. It was playing on like Showtime or something. And I was probably like 10 years old. So I guess it's a nostalgia thing.
I didn't see any Sleepaway Camp movies until I was 20 years old, probably.
Yeah, well.
And then I saw the first one, and I was like, what the fuck just happened when I saw the ending? And then it's like, well, I'm going to watch some of the other ones. And I watched 2 and 3. And I was like,
well, see, I saw 3 and then went back and watched 1 and 2. Well, not for years, like, because I saw 3 when I was like 10. So then I remember being like 13 years old, going to a video rental store and looking at old stuff. And I saw Sleepaway Camp 3, and I was like, why does that sound familiar? And I was like, oh, that's that movie I watched, you know, as a kid with the lawnmower thing. So my mom like rented all 3 of them for me. And
that is equally as weird. So like I said, I watched Sleepaway Camp 1 when I was probably 20. And if you're of a certain age, then you remember how Netflix used to work. Netflix, you used to have to get online, look at the movies they had, and then they would send you DVDs in the mail. And then when you were done, you'd put the DVDs back in the envelope, you would send them back. So that's how I watched Sleepaway Camp 1.
Set up your queue.
Yeah, you'd set up your queue, and they'd automatically send them to you, which was sick at the time, but now it's like, man, that sucked. But Yeah, so that's how I saw Sleepaway Camp 1, and then 2 and 3 I just watched once streaming was a major player, and I was able to see those. But uh 2, like I said, much better movie except for the special effects. I think the special effects are leave something to be desired in the second movie. Um but yeah, I don't know. How about my favorite kill though from the second one is Death by Leatherface when Angela kills
Or is
Freddy
that
and
the third?
Jason.
That's the third one.
Oh, is it?
No, that is the
No, it's the
second one.
second
No,
one.
you're right. You're right. You're
Yeah.
right. You're right.
So yeah, so when she's dressed up, because it pays homage to, of course, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, um, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th. And so they're having craft time, and two of the kids there they make masks or whatever. So yeah, so they have this thing in the second film where they're constantly trying to scare Angela, and she ends up putting on this Leatherface mask and kills them both.
Yep. She kills the Freddy dude with his own fucking like glove prop.
Right. Also,
So mine, you've also got this listed,
right.
And this is my absolute favorite because if you think about it, this would be a shitty way to die. So this character Allie, she basically gets stabbed a fuck ton of times, and then like dunked head first into like an outhouse shitter, and basically drowns in shit.
Yeah.
So even if she didn't die from the drowning, like she's gonna die because she's got open wounds, and now she's like getting fecal matter and shit in there. But it's like, I don't know, it's just a brutal kill because like you can hear her drowning.
Do you think
And
you would
it's
die
just-
from getting fecal matter in your wounds, or would you just get
I mean,
an acute
like you would
infection?
get a gnarly infection. You would get a gnarly ass infection. I mean, like if you had like a small scrape or something,
What if it was a?
that's probably not gonna kill you. But she was like stabbed, dude. Like a fuck ton of times. She gets stabbed like multiple times before she's dunked in there.
I feel like we need.
Because you remember in
I feel like we need to phone
what?
in a doctor. I think we need to have a
Phone in a doctor?
Yeah, I think we need to consult a doctor on this. Be like, hypothetically speaking, if I was stabbed,
look,
if I had an
dude.
open wound and somebody shit in it, would I die from the amount of fecal matter that my body just ingested?
I think there's a word for that because it also happens in the remake or the sequel to the remake for The Hills Have Eyes. In part 2, like the military's in the desert, like one of them gets killed because they get slashed all over their body and then dunked into the outhouse.
Here we go. I'm asking the internet. What happens if feces enters your bloodstream? We're gonna get.
This is the content you signed up
We're gonna
for.
get here. So this person says there would be a huge immune reaction due to an unknown substance that also contains numerous bacteria, usually prevented from entering the bloodstream. Okay, blah 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 blah. Disease and sepsis. Those.
Short answer, it's a possibility, but it's not that likely.
Well, I mean, depending on the quality of feces and quantity of feces, truly determines the risk involved. All right.
So in that situation, are you more of a quality or quantity guy?
I couldn't tell you. I couldn't even freaking tell you. I mean, I guess
so-
with the amount of stab wounds she had and the amount of feces in the outhouse, she probably died died from the shit.
She was going to die either way. Like, she was stabbed, she would have bled out, she would have drowned, or got some kind of infection. So, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to get from watching Sleepaway Camp. So, we're not even going to talk about Return to Sleepaway Camp or Sleepaway Camp 4. The only other notable one is Sleepaway Camp 3, which came out 1 year after Sleepaway Camp 2. So, this is 1989. Pamela Springsteen does make her return as Angela. And fun little fact, the first role that Pamela Springsteen ever had was as a cheerleader in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, alongside another cheerleader in that film, Kelly Maroney, who played Allison Parks in Chopping Mall. There will be a Chopping Mall episode, don't worry. So, Teenage Wasteland is Sleepaway Camp 3. Now, this film, from what I've seen, gets the most shit talked about it.
2 words.
But I love this film.
2 words. Milkshake.
Go for it.
That's it.
Milkshake.
If you've seen the movie, then you know. If you haven't seen the movie, then you don't know.
Yeah, and you need to go watch it if you haven't. So, Pamela Springsteen is back as Angela. Basically, this film picks up, the dad of one of the characters from the second film is now out for revenge. So he's at this summer camp. And this film, the reason like I said, I like this film the most is this is the first one that I ever saw. I was a kid, and it's nostalgic, but also some of the deaths in this film are really fun. And sad thing is I have seen the unrated version of this, or the deleted scenes from this, and some of these kills the MPAA really got a hold of in all the wrong ways and neutered some of these scenes. But I think my favorite kill from this film, one of the most notable when I was a kid, is the lawnmower scene. And then I think second to that would probably be the flagpole scene, even though that scene is fucking ridiculous. Because, okay, I'm going to give this one away if you guys haven't seen it. So basically, she hooks this girl up to a flagpole. She blindfolds her, walks her to it, hooks her to it. And then she hoists her all the way to the top and then lets go. And she falls down and lands head first and busts her head all over the concrete. How in the fuck did Angela hoist this girl up that flagpole? I don't believe it. Beast mode, I guess. I mean, maybe she tapped into her summer camp slasher strength that they just all inherently have. So what was you...
I was going to say, I think one of the most interesting things about 2 and 3 is the fact that they both were filmed over a 6-week period.
Yeah, well, you can definitely tell, too. Like, in the third one, I mean, the acting is just like... Some of the repeat characters are just like, meh. Like, Pamela Springsteen was even just kind of like... I'm just going to go for whatever.
Well, I mean, they literally filmed them back to back, and to me, that's such a feat, right? Because they had, from what I read, they had 1 weekend of pre-production going from 2 into 3. And that's insane. That's insane.
Yeah.
So there was that, and there's a couple other cool little facts in here. So the license plate numbers on the Mack truck correspond with the house numbers in A Nightmare on Elm Street. So a little Easter egg there, if anybody is hip to that. Also, all the characters are named after, most of the characters are named after characters from A West Side Story, the Brady Bunch, and the Munsters. I'm sure you caught that. And
yeah, well, in part 2, they were named after you had
Emilio, the
Estevez brothers, so there was
something. Yeah, there was something in that one. And then, of course, they have the hockey mask, right, in this one that they dig out of the lake, which is another little Easter egg. But I think my favorite kill from this one, I liked the lawnmower head as well, right? And then I also liked the arms ripped off with a rope, and where they rip them off of the Jeep.
Now the only reason that's not my favorite is because of how that scene got neutered. But if you go, I don't know if you've seen it. I have. Yeah, so the original footage for that, like, you straight up see the arms being ripped off, but then of course the MPAA was like, no. So
yeah. I'm surprised it still wasn't your favorite scene, being a Jeep.
It's a Jeep
man and all.
Yeah. Yeah.
But because Murder by Jeep just sounds.
Well, they also tried to do the same thing in not part 4, but Return to Sleepaway Camp. They tried to steal that kill because Return to Sleepaway Camp ignores parts 2 and 3, and is a direct sequel to the first one. But So I don't. You said you didn't finish it, correct?
Yeah, Return to Sleepaway Camp.
Yeah. So there's a scene where they tie a dude to a tree, and they tie a fishing line to his dick, and it's connected to a Jeep, and then this girl gets scared because she sees like, you know, a dead body or whatever, sees the dude being killed, and she gets scared and runs and gets in the Jeep and just speeds off.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to the end of the fishing line, it rips his dick off.
So here's my take on stuff. Here's my
not the movie stuff.
Not the movie stuff. Here's my take
The stuff.
on films. Okay. So, and this pertains to this one, right? I like bad movies, right? But I like movies that are what's the word I'm looking for? I like movies that don't know they're bad. They're accidentally bad, right? I don't like movies that set out to be bad on purpose.
I'm looking at you, Thanksgiving 3.
I quickly lose interest in movies that are like, guess how shitty we can make this. And I think that's kind of what this was. And I was like, well, you know, now you're wasting my motherfucking time. I'm not interested.
Well, I don't feel that from this. I mean, I can get where you would see that, but I feel like it's just a matter of the fact that it was shot back to back. I just don't feel like there was enough thought put into it, given that, hey, we just wrapped up part 2 and now we're going to do part 3 a week later.
Are we talking about 3? I'm talking about Return to Sleepaway Camp.
Oh, Return to Sleepaway Camp. Oh, yeah, then I completely agree with that.
Yeah, part
Yeah, I thought you were talking about part 3.
Part 3 I like.
Okay, yeah, Return to Sleepaway Camp. The only good thing about that is it's like, hey, Felisa Rose came back. Surprise at the end. But other than that, yeah, I completely agree.
All right, so when it comes to Sleepaway Camp, Justin, I think my favorite goes 2, 3, 1, and I disregard all the others. How's your order for that?
Mine would probably be the same, just 3 and 2 interchangeable only by the grounds of, like I said, the nostalgia. You know, Sleepaway Camp 3 is the first one I saw, and if I hadn't seen that on like Showtime or whatever channel it was playing on, I probably Skinamax. I probably wouldn't have found. It was one of those. It was like Cinemax, HBO, something like that. But I wouldn't have found the franchise until later. But so yeah, 3, 2, 1 or 2, 3, 1. So that pretty much sums it up for Sleepaway Camp. So this next film is not a franchise. It's a standalone film. This is 1981's The Burning, directed by Tony Maylam. It is also written by him and Peter Lawrence. So this is also starring Leah Ayres and Jason Alexander, among other people. And it's weird to see Jason Alexander in this kind of role.
Yeah.
This film, I feel like this film at the beginning too also gave me the very like sleazy vibes, because the scene with the hooker was very like Maniac-esque. It was like if Maniac would have been a giallo, you would have got the scene where Cropsey goes with the call girl back to her apartment or whatever, and you know, he's standing in the shadows. He's got like the hat and he's got the jacket, and all you see is his gloves when he kills her, and you don't see his face. And also, this is based on the New York urban legend of the Cropsey Maniac. So I also just want to point out, this whole film, I do this way too often, and this also stops me whenever I'm writing my own films. Sometimes I will be watching a film and I will notice how ridiculous it is that this entire plot was set off by one simple thing. So you notice, Andrew, this whole film was his own damn fault, because these kids put like a little skull with little candles in the eyes, and he's got like maggots and stuff all over it, and they're knocking on the caretaker's window until he wakes up, and he sees the skull beside his bed and he freaks out. But then he very, very, I mean, this was obviously just the acting. It wasn't necessarily like it would have happened this way in real life, but the actor literally just kind of swats the skull onto the bed, and then that lights the bed on fire because of the candles.
Yeah, so, I mean, had he not been such a bitch, then
Right.
then all these deaths and everything could have been avoided. You know, like,
Or at least like just gotten up and ran away. Instead, he's like, let me just smack this shit on my bed.
I'm so mad now because you guys scared me.
That I'm gonna cause everything to burn. Hence the burning.
Yeah. I don't know. This movie is one of those that, I mean, it's an early on slasher. It's definitely worth watching. I watched it early on in my horror watching career, I guess you could call it, and it stands up to this day. I can still watch it. It, like Justin said, it's sleazy enough for people that really like the early slashers or some stuff coming out of the tail end of the Grindhouse period. And it also has a decent enough story. You know, it's derived from, you know, your real life urban legends, particularly those urban legends told up in New York, upstate New York, and, you know, based around Cropsey. So, you know, there's people out there that are still telling this type of story to their kids. So there's a movie based around that character. So if you're telling your kids about Cropsey, you should probably show them The Burning.
Yep.
We advocate for showing children horror movies a lot on here, don't we? I think we say that like at least one episode.
Yeah, every episode it's like, you want to show your kids something nice? Show them street trash.
Show them Cannibal Holocaust.
Cannibal Holocaust. Yeah.
Tell them to leave those fucking turtles alone.
Yeah. Just show that as like an animal rights film. But I like The Burning. It's as simple as it is. It's just a straightforward slasher. There are some super cool moments. I think probably my favorite kill in the film. It's actually I think four kills all in one. So there's a scene where they're now isolated on this. It's not an island, but they're like way far away from camp. They went on like a canoe trip, and they're going to be camping for 3 days. And now all their canoes are gone because, you know, Cropsey is like, let them go. So they build a raft, and 4 of the campers are now like trying to get back to camp to get help, or at least find the canoes. So they see one of their canoes floating out in the middle of the lake, and they're like, hey, let's go check it out. Let's get our canoe. And as they approach it, you know, you can tell something's about to happen. The first time I saw this film, I thought that the body of one of the first girls to die that they've been looking for, I thought they were going to find her, but then they come right up to the canoe, and it's like, bam! Cropsey pops up with his garden shears and literally just kills all 4 of them. And then that's it.
Yeah.
I just thought it was pretty cool. Especially because you still don't see him. Like, he pops up out of the canoe, and like you just see his hands and like the garden trimmers. Yeah.
No, I think that's probably my favorite one too. But yeah, The Burning. It's sick. Go watch it.
Yep. So now we are going to talk about probably the reigning champion of summer camp horror films.
You can't talk summer camp without talking about this.
And that would be good old Bloody Murder. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, we're going to talk about Bloody Bible Camp.
Yeah, Bloody Bible Camp.
That's it.
Yeah, Friday the 13th, though, is what we are actually talking about. So we're not going to break these down in like individual films because there's like a million of these.
God, we'd be here for all like of them. 6 months talking.
Yeah, there will be a whole Friday the 13th episode. But this, we're just going to talk about the franchise a little bit, mainly sticking around what films. I think it's only 1, 2, and 6 are technically the only ones that actually have summer camps. The rest kind of have different things like halfway houses or just kids on road trips, just hanging out at cabins and stuff.
Or a motherfucking space station.
Yeah, we don't talk about that except one scene, and that is the very, very fan-fucking-tastic ice
head
scene.
smash.
The head smash with the The liquid, what is it?
It's like liquid nitrogen.
The dry ice, liquid nitrogen shit.
The dry ice. Yeah, it's liquid nitrogen in the movie. Dry ice probably on set or something of that magnitude. But
yeah, so
see,
Friday the 13th. Go ahead.
We need to consult a scientist because I want to know if that's actually plausible. If like you were to stick somebody's head in that, and then would their skull freeze that fast to where, or would it freeze to a certain extent to where if you slammed it on a desk, it would smash like that?
I mean, I'm gonna say yes. Have you ever seen Terminator 2?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. The whole ending scene was set up by this scientific fact. That whole movie is scientifically true.
Is it?
Yes. I don't know.
I was about to say
we're gonna start a new segment where we call in Bill Nye every episode.
We're gonna start a new podcast called Horror and Science, and we're just gonna talk about stuff that's plausible.
Yeah, get Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson on every episode. So, the first Friday the 13th film came out in 1980. So, this is, by now, the slasher genre has started to take off. You've already had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 74, Black Christmas in, like, around the same time. You had Halloween in 1978. You had hadn't the original The Town That Dreaded Sundown already come out by then, too?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so this is fresh off some, heavy-hitting slasher films. But
I'm pretty sure that they said, now I can quote this, I think it was Victor Miller or it was Sean Cunningham as one of the two that said, and I quote, that I'm not going to quote, I don't know the exact quote, but it was something along the lines that they saw how much money Halloween was making and they wanted to get a quick cash grab, so they made Friday the 13th, and they put out an ad in the paper with the title of the film before they'd even written the movie, just to see if they could get financing for it. Did you know that?
I heard something about that. I didn't know the exact details.
Yeah,
that's pretty crazy. Now, this film did have some unique things going on, though. It takes place at a summer camp. Again, early 80s slasher, so there are major giallo elements. The whole film starts out in like 1950 something, and you don't see the killer. You just see it's like their point of view. Then it cuts to modern day, which is 1980, and you still through the whole film you don't know who's doing it until the very end. Now, Friday the 13th as a franchise, and I'll talk more about this like when we do a whole episode. I have a love-hate relationship with this because I feel like this, along with Halloween, and maybe this, Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Child's Play are 4 franchises that the longer they went on, the more just batshit stupid they kind of became. And they changed from what they originally were. But luckily for us, as far as summer camp films go, the 3 that primarily happen at summer camp are the good old classic Friday the 13th films. And that would be parts 1, 2, and then our collective favorite here at Black Mass Films, part 6. So, of course, this is probably the most notable summer camp horror franchise. Has 9 sequels, 1 crossover, and a reboot. So they definitely milked this for everything that they possibly could have. So,
and they're still milking it to this day.
And yeah, they're especially trying with the reboot. Now there was some copyright issues with that, so that's why there's not been a sequel to the 2009 reboot.
Right. Well, I mean,
I kind of hope it stays that way.
Well, I mean, they're in court fighting over Victor Miller and Sean S. Cunningham are fighting over the rights to actually the Jason Voorhees character. So I hate it because I love the story. I love Jason Voorhees. I would love to see it go on. I mean, we talk about remakes and how we don't like them. I didn't hate the Friday the 13th remake or reboot. I thought it was better than most reboots.
It was, but I definitely think I didn't hate it, but I definitely didn't like it by any means. To me, that wasn't Jason. he was way too. That almost seemed to me more like a Burning reboot.
I can see that. I mean, I don't think it. Let me clarify what I'm saying. I don't think it took place of the first film. I think it was just I think it was a decent modern day addition, right? So I think it was not terrible in the lineup because there are worse ones already in the lineup.
Definitely, there also are worse reboots. Rob Zombie's Halloween, but I don't know. I feel like the reboot, you know, I could have technically, I guess, listed that on the ones that have the summer camp vibe, but the reboot to me, like I said, it felt more like the Burning reboot, you know, with him, especially, you know, in the Burning, they've got the, at the end where he finds like the place where the dude like hides out, and it's like the weird like tunnels and stuff, and then they made Jason like some super intelligent hunter in the 2009 remake, and he's got like the tunnels, and that explains how he gets everywhere so fast. And I don't know, it was just weird to me. But the interesting thing about the originals though, and this is something that shockingly for some reason a lot of people don't know, they claim like, oh, I love Jason and I love Friday the 13th, but I've talked to people sometimes and they don't know that Jason's not even the killer in the original.
Right.
Like, how crazy is that this film came out in 1980 and people still don't know that it was good old Momma Voorhees.
Right. Well, that's sort of why it has the evolution it has, right? When you start talking about the evolution of Jason Voorhees was because they didn't know what the hell they were going to do. Like, they didn't even know that Jason was going to be disfigured like he is at the end of the movie at the canoe scene, right? They didn't know that he was going to be disfigured. That was just sort of like a last ditch effort by Savini, right? Savini supposedly just started putting on makeup, and then all of a sudden he decided to make him like this disfigured little boy as opposed to just a child, right? And then they didn't know going into the second film what they were going to do, so they put a bag on his head. You know, they were like, okay, so
didn't even get the hockey mask until part 3.
Right. So this is how, you know, Jason slowly started evolving. With every movie, they kind of changed a little bit. And then they were like, okay, well, the hockey mask is working. So they kept that, but then they started slowly changing the mask, slowly started changing the outfit. And, you know, it sort of peaked around, I don't know, maybe 5, maybe 4. Maybe episode 4, 5, or part 4, 5, and 6. I think
those are my 3 favorite for sure.
4, 5, and 6. I like,
yes, because that gives you the Tommy Jarvis story,
right? Which 6 is my number 1 favorite. You've already covered that. I also really like number 3. Not for just the 3D gimmick, but I just like the storyline a lot.
Right. Well, it's also. You know, where he gets the mask, and I feel like part 3 is definitely where it starts to take shape. Everything finally starts to come together, as opposed to, you know, the first one, it's like, well, it's his mom, and now in the sequel, it's like basically the first one, but it's now him, but he's got like the town that dreaded sundown burlap sack kind of thing going on, and a flannel shirt and coveralls.
Part 3 has the most cinematic looking shot in all of the Friday the 13th films.
You're talking about the popcorn, right?
No. I'm talking about, if you watch in the beginning of the film, it's where oh god, what is that character's name? It's where they're walking up to the house and you can see the sun setting in the background, and it actually has this lens flare on the camera, and I'm like, or on the lens, and it's just, that is not something they do in any of the other Friday the 13th films. There's not another shot in the entire anthology, right? The entire filmography of Friday the 13th. It's just that one scene, and it's like, I don't know. It's like they were feeling some type of way on that one shot. They're like, get the sun in here, get that lens flare. And if you watch part 3,
they called in Robert Deakins just for the, or Roger Deakins just for that.
Who's Robert Deakins? No. It's the great
well,
value.
Well, no, Deakins. I was gonna mention. I I was looking at some of the notes and thinking of Friday the 13th. Then my mind goes down these weird tunnels, and then I went to A Nightmare on Elm Street and started thinking of Robert Englund, and then I had a thought about the cinematography of that shot. I was gonna say before my mind just completely went. They called in Roger Deakins just for that one shot. Fun fact. Just kidding. Don't believe shit that I say when it comes to these little tidbits, because that did not happen.
Believe it.
Yeah. If you want to believe it, though, just go ahead and go around telling people that Roger Deakins filmed this one shot in part 3. But no, I feel like Friday the 13th part 3 is where everything started to finally come together. Even though this technically wasn't a summer camp horror film, it followed the same. All of the films, even the ones that don't happen at summer camp, follow the same formula, right? So even in part 5, where, now young adult Tommy Jarvis is going to like the halfway house or whatever that little getaway place is for mentally unstable people. It's the same formula. It's just not a summer camp. But part 4, 5, and 6 for me is if I could get rid of every other, like if I had to, I would get rid of every other film besides 4, 5, and 6.
Oh, that's tough. I'm gonna say
no. I'm not saying I would want to. I'm just saying if you had a gun to my head and said you can only pick 3,
4, 5, and 6,
it'd be 4, 5, and 6.
Trying to think of 5. I mean, I get so
5 was okay. 5 because 5 was controversial as well, because 5 they did basically what Halloween 3 did. It's not Jason. It was the paramedic, and the only reason I'm choosing 5 is because 4, 5, and 6 is like that's the Tommy Jarvis trilogy, and 5 has to be there. 5 is the one where they had the mask. It had the blue chevrons instead of the red.
Yeah.
And it was the paramedic.
Yeah.
But then that leads into 6, right? So
yeah, I mean,
which is the whole payoff for watching 5
right.
all the way
So
through.
I mean, 5. Yeah, 5 is rad. I could go with 3, 4, 5, 6. I could do that. But see, I fucking love kill me, whatever. I love Jason Takes Manhattan. Now,
fucking same.
Now,
it shouldn't be called that, but it's still a fucking awesome movie.
Now, there's so many holes in that. It's obviously not a summer camp movie, and we're talking about summer camps, but we'll have to talk New York horror another day and talk more about this one. But I love that one. But let's get back into to summer camp stuff, right? So,
well, real quick, I just wanna say one thing about Jason Takes Manhattan, because now you've actually given me grounds to challenge your previous statement about the cinematography in this franchise. Tell me that shot of Jason standing in the middle of fucking Times Square is not some awesome ass shit.
Cinematic masterpiece.
That is a cinematic masterpiece. No, really, you've got Jason Voorhees in full get up with the mask and everything, standing in the middle of Times Square, and the camera just kind of pans around, and it's just, I don't know, it's fucking epic.
Well,
now that is kind of taken away a little bit from when he's walking past the street punks, and they're threatening him, and he's just he lifts his mask up.
Well, I mean, here we go. We're going to talk about Jason Takes Manhattan because...
No, I said something, now you get something.
Well...
We're fair here.
I think that had they went with more Jason Taking Manhattan, I think it would have been one of the greatest horror movies ever made. If
I can see that, but it's what the first 50 minutes or 60 minutes or so is on the boat.
Which is fine. That's fine. The boat story is great, and it's campy, and it's Friday the 13th, right? That should have been another film, right? Something about where they come and you have these kids that are on a houseboat partying in Camp Crystal Lake, right? And it should have just been that, right? Not all of a sudden all of a sudden Camp Crystal Lake or Crystal Lake flows into the Hudson River or flows into the ocean, and then we get on the Hudson River somehow, which makes no fucking sense whatsoever. And then, you know, not even just that oversight, but, you know, it's like you're only allowed like what, maybe 20 minutes of Jason in Manhattan, and he's not even doing anything other than just like
chasing these two people.
So like, I mean, and then, you know, of course he destroys that boombox and stuff, which is epic. But if we had more of that,
he just kind of kicks
right.
it.
So if we had more of that, where he's like terrorizing the city of New York, I mean, not like Ghostbuster style, you know, not like you know, the giant Stay Puft Man, but, you know, just like,
well, reportedly there was supposed to be a lot of that, but the movie's budget wouldn't allow for it. But I mean, we'll definitely do a Friday the 13th episode and really dive into a lot of these films, because I mean, Friday the 13th just as a whole is a really good franchise. Andrew and I have both talked before, even though Halloween is my favorite horror film, or at least slasher film, Friday the 13th is probably the better franchise.
That's what I always tell everybody.
It took longer to get weird, and it has fewer weird films.
Well, here's the thing about it is Friday the 13th knew what they were doing, and they knew what they were doing because they were going after money, right? And so they knew what strings to pull, as to where I think Halloween, right? I think that whole series of films, they were, how can we make this a better story, or how can we make this story make sense, or what are we gonna do? That's why you got number 3, right? Season of the Witch, right? That's why you got that movie, because it's like, okay, well, what other kind of fucked up stories can we tell within this this atmosphere that we created, you know? But, you know, Friday the 13th, they decided, they knew the formula that made them money, so they made film after film after film after film that were very similar.
Right. Yeah, they definitely stuck to it was the whole if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing.
Yeah, the last thing I want to say, Justin, the last point I want to make in this episode is, I talked about a little bit in the Giallo episode. And if you're going overseas or sending your child overseas, do not send them to an academy, a private school, or a ballet school, because bad shit's going to happen. If you're in America, do not send your kids to a summer camp, because bad shit's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say.
Always.
That's all I got to say.
Yeah. So I guess that's going to wrap up this episode. I know this was a hell of an episode. It was long, and we could literally have made entire episodes talking about each of these individual films. Well, probably not The Burning. I don't think I could talk about that for 2 hours, but definitely Sleepaway Camp and Friday the 13th. These aren't the only summer camp horror films out there. There are some other weird ones, you know, like we mentioned before, Bloody Bloody Bible Camp, and there's like it's called Cheerleader Camp or something. But these just are the 3 that represent the genre the best in our opinions. So I guess we will wrap this up. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, it is Cinema Creek Pod, and you can also find us on Instagram at Black Mass Films and Twitter at Black Mass Films. I am Horror Dad 13 on Twitter and Instagram. Andrew, you want to shout out your socials?
Yep, I am Drucifer, Drew X Cipher, across everything. So
yeah, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So thank you guys for listening to this episode, and hopefully we get our schedule completely back on track. So stay creepy, guys. We will see you next week.